Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for day 2 of our Home Buyer Forum. Today, we will be hearing from an attorney and a home inspector. We're really excited to bring these experts to you with their years of experience. My name is Jen Fries. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the Harvard University Employees Credit Union. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Ryan Douglas, who's a mortgage loan originator with the credit union with years of experience helping people buy their homes. J- Just a little bit about what to expect today. First of all, attendees, we cannot see you and we cannot hear you, so go ahead and enjoy your lunch or do whatever you need to do to um, while you're participating in this webinar. We're going to ask you to use the Q&A feature for questions. So at the bottom of your screen, typically where your mute button is, there's also a place that says Q&A. At any point during today's webinar, go ahead and drop a question in there. We're going to be answering questions at the end. We also will be recording this webinar and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. Our handle is myhuecu. So you'll be able to watch it again and we'll send out the slides. So don't worry about taking notes. At the end of the webinar, we are going to ask for your feedback and ask you how we did. So please fill out a survey and let us know how that went for you. Just by attending today's webinar, you have been entered into a raffle to win prizes. We will be giving away, choosing randomly and giving away prizes such as an Amazon Echo Dot, a Ring doorbell, HUECU swag, and gift cards to Lowe's and Etsy. So if you get an email from me about a raffle prize, it is not spam. You've won our raffle, and that's just a thank you for participating in our Homebuyer Forum. A little bit about the credit union. The Harvard University Employees Credit Union is a not-for-profit financial institution. We were founded by and are operated by Harvard employees. Um, we are owned by the members, and because of that, we are able to offer some of the best rates and services available because we're not responsible for shareholders or making a profit for shareholders. Everything is reinvested back into members and into the community. So wherever you're joining us from, we also have things like shared branches with other co-ops, so you can bank with us nationwide. And of course, we have online banking as well. Ryan, would you like to tell folks a little bit about the benefits of having the credit union on your team?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for day 2. It's great to have you back. Or if you're, watching down the road, thank you for watching again. Just a few things just to touch base on again from yesterday. Benefits of working with the credit union, personalized service. We're there for you. We're the credit union. We're here to assist you with whatever you need. Please reach out to us. It's going to be individualized to your specific needs. And with that, we're going to offer a range of mortgage products that do fit your needs as a borrower. We have competitive rates and credits, mainly for our first-time home buyers, which majority of the people viewing this probably are. So we give you a discounted rate, eighth of a percent off of whatever that advertised rate is for being a first-time home buyer with us. Low to moderate down payment options for first-time home buyers as well. Please join us Friday. Helen and Sharon will be going over this. They are the experts. They will walk us through. And then we also offer you a closing cost credit, which would be $500 for being a first-time home buyer, as well as a digital process. We have in-house loan servicing, so we will service this loan for you for the life of the loan. There's no chasing around to get a question answered. Reach out to one of us. We'll get it solved for you after you do close on your loan, which is great. And then we also offer portfolio lending capabilities as well.
Thank you, Ryan. A little bit about today and the rest of the week. We are midway through our Homebuyer Forum, and As you know, today we're hearing from an attorney and a home inspector. Tomorrow we'll hear from our mortgage loan officers about the home buying process. And on Friday, we're going to hear from some other mortgage loan officers with the credit union, as well as an official from the city of Cambridge to talk about affordable paths to home ownership. That's mostly going to be relevant to folks in Massachusetts, but not entirely. So I know people are joining us from all over. Sorry about that. Um, okay, so today we are really excited to bring you these panelists. We're going to hear from Ken Ray from Kensa Inspections. He's done more than 1,300 home inspections and just has a wealth of knowledge to share with you about what your home inspection can do for you during this process and how important it is. And then we're going to hear from Sarah Ricciardelli, who is the founder of Ricciardelli and Small, and she's been in business for more than 25 years as an attorney specializing in residential real estate. And we're actually going to hear from Sarah first. So take it away, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Jen, and very nice to meet everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm sure a lot of you as first-time buyers are a bit nervous in buying a home and taking whatever money you might have saved for a down payment and transferring it to another asset. I think the seminar is fantastic. I've done it in the past, and I think you'll get a lot of great information. Harvard Credit Union does a good job making sure their first-time home buyers are informed, and so I'm happy to be part of this process. Next slide. So a little bit about our firm. So as Jen mentioned, we've been practicing for over 25 years. We are a transactional firm. We're transaction specific to real estate. So all we do is the sale of condominiums, single family homes, multifamily, commercial, representing both buyers, sellers, and lenders. It's nice to have a transaction specific firm who does and specializes in real estate. Because some firms out there dabble in a little bit of real estate, and that can be difficult if they really aren't familiar with all the nuances and changes, which there have been several over the past years. So that's something to keep in mind when you are choosing a law firm to represent you in a transaction. Next slide. So a little bit about Massachusetts and how that works. So Massachusetts is a two-part contract state. Some of you might be coming from other states or have family members guiding you from other states, may never have seen this process before, as most states don't do it this way. And so what we have is an offer and a purchase and sale agreement. An offer is a 2 to 3 page document that has some templated paragraphs, which we'll talk about in a minute, fairly simple. And a purchase and sale agreement is signed after the offer and is a much more complex document that can be 10, 20, 30, 40, and as of yesterday, 50 pages long. So you definitely need someone to help you in navigating all of this. What is an offer? So an offer, as I said, is a templated form. And in there are things like, what's the purchase price? What's the closing date? What's included in the purchase in the home? Sometimes it's appliances, washer, dryer, if that's included. And if you are including appliances or washer, dryer, you want to make sure to list all of that in the offer, because if you don't, then it's not included. If you love a chandelier and you want to make sure that's included, list it. Window treatments, who would have thought window treatments were so expensive? But if you love them and you want them, then make sure to include that in the offer. The offer has in it a bunch of other things that you can add, or sometimes that are addendums to it. As I mentioned, condominiums, if you're buying a condominium, one of the things you want to have in there is a condominium review contingency, and usually that's a separate page that gets attached, and it gives you a period of time to review the condominium documents. It might have a master deed, a declaration of trust, etc., minutes of the condominiums, and so all of that would have to be reviewed during the offer phase before the purchase and sale is signed. Other types of contingencies you might find in an offer. You might find a financing contingency, which is where lenders like Harvard Credit Union come in. And so In a competitive seller's market, many times buyers will consider waiving their financing contingency. And they do this because they're trying to outbid another buyer and make their offers as strong as possible. When you do that, you put your purchase and sale deposit at risk. And we'll talk about this a little more further on. So when doing a offer, if you want to waive financing, you want to make sure that you have another way of purchasing the home in the event your financing gets denied. So something to strongly consider before you decide, yes, I'm going to waive financing. You also want to make sure you have a really good lender who can work with you to make sure that your financing is as tight as possible, or perhaps to get you as pre-approved as possible before you sign the offer. I know Harvard's great at vetting all that out before you sign, and that becomes helpful to you in making you feel more comfortable if you have to go that route. Other things that you could consider as contingencies or waiving in an offer is an appraisal contingency. A typical offer does not have an appraisal contingency listed in it. It only has, if you've agreed to do it, a financing contingency. An appraisal contingency says, I will buy this home if it appraises at the purchase price that I've set forth in my offer. If the appraisal comes in low, but the bank can still give you the mortgage amount at the same purchase price, and you don't have a separate offer appraisal contingency, then you're not able to renegotiate the price or terminate the deal based on the appraised value. So it's two separate things, a mortgage financing contingency and an appraisal contingency. Mortgage finance contingencies is a templated form, appraisal contingencies there's not. And that's something to discuss. Again, in a seller's market, it's difficult to put those things and contingencies in the offer. The other contingency, which I know Ken will talk about, is an inspection contingency. And I'll let Ken get into this in more detail, but if you waive an inspection contingency, you are taking the property as is. So if you haven't had an opportunity to test appliances and they don't work, you've accepted that. If you haven't had an opportunity to see if windows, they open and close, you've accepted that. So again, I'll let Ken get into that a little bit more, but those are some of the contingencies that you would add in an offer. If most of you are first-time buyers, but just to talk about it for a brief moment, if you were trying to sell a home to buy another home, then you would have to have what's called a home sale contingency in the offer. And this would be contingency saying, yes, I will buy your home, provided I can sell my home before the time of our closing. You may consider having a seller pay some of your closing costs. Harvard does a great job at offering some reduced rate programs for first-time buyers, but perhaps you need a little bit more to contribute in order for you to purchase your home. And you can talk to your broker about this as well, but you can ask the seller to say, I will make you an offer of, for example, $200,000, provided you give me a $5,000 closing cost credit towards my closing costs. And you can only do it for basically up to your closing costs. You can't exceed that. But that's a way for a buyer who's a little tight on cash flow to have a little more flexibility with the seller paying for closing costs. And again, that has to be negotiated during the offer phase. You can't really add that on later. We talked about appliances that'll be included in there. Again, anything you want to be included in the purchase and sale of the home must be included in the offer, or it simply won't be part of the deal. Dates do matter. So when you're putting in dates, your broker will have you fill this form. And again, it's a fairly short templated form. And in there, you'll put your closing date. On your closing date, you have to attend the closing. You'll also have a purchase and sale date, which is that second contract we talked about. Usually it's about 7 to 10 days for purchase and sale. At least that's how it used to be. During a strong seller's market, your broker might say to you, let's do this purchase and sale within 2 days or 3 days, which is extremely aggressive. So be ready to have a lot of information thrown at you at once to read everything in that period and be comfortable with that. And so if you're doing that, it is so important to have a really good team by your side who can help you navigate all of the nuances, review documents, and have the time to be available. When you're choosing an attorney or a lender or an inspector, you want to ask about their availability, because that's in this market, when it's still slightly stronger sales market, which we didn't think it would be, you want to make sure that you have someone who's available for questions when you need them during that short contingency period. Next slide. So you've signed the offer, you've gone through the inspection phase if you've had one, and you review the condominium documents if it's a condominium. And so the next thing is a purchase and sale agreement. What's the difference between an offer and a purchase and sale is basically in some parts, the length of the document, which we talked about before. And also there's a lot of additional terms included. Many years ago, when I first started, offers were considered non-binding, but there was a very famous case called McCarthy v. Tobin, which came out and said that offers are binding. And so if you sign an offer and a seller tries to say, I'm no longer selling you the home, you can actually take that offer and enforce it in court. But we also kept these purchase and sale agreements, which makes it slightly confusing. So you're bound under terms, but it's contingent on this purchase and sale agreement. And so, as I said, it's a much longer document, and we have a lot more detail in there. So you'll have all of the terms from the offer carry forward, at least the ones where contingencies haven't expired. And you'll put in there things like what's considered good title. And your attorney should be seasoned enough in title exam in order to determine what's considered good title and to be able to explain that to you. There's a lot of issues that can come up in title exams. So you want someone who knows what to put in a purchase and sale agreement, because the title review happens after the purchase and sale agreement. So you're going to sign this and you're going to give the remainder of your deposit, which is 5% total. And then after that, after the giving of the deposit, then the remaining contingencies will last, which is title exam, condition of the property remaining the same, seller being able to sell the property to you, and then what other contingencies you've transferred over the offer, like a financing contingency. Again, the amount of money at risk and the difference between the offer and the purchase and sale agreement is there's $1,000 at risk in an offer, and there's 5% of the purchase price at risk once you sign the purchase and sale. If it's not, once you sign the purchase and sale, if it's not in there, then it's not part of the deal. So you try to get everything in at the offer, as much as you can, as far as what's included, as far as contingencies. At that point, $1,000 at risk. When you go to sign the P&S, if you forgot something, now's your chance to try to get it in. If it's a material part of the deal, they likely won't add it, which is why it's getting into the offer is more important. But at least at this point, before you sign the P&S, your risk is $1,000 versus 5% of the purchase price. If there are any inspection issues that come up post-offer from Ken doing his diligent inspection and finding everything that's wrong with the property, those issues will be addressed in the purchase and sale agreement, however the parties decide to address them, whether it's repair or perhaps you've decided you want to fix it yourself and just taking credit towards that repair. But that would be something that's a little more complicated that can be talked about when you get into the deal. The other thing we talked about a little bit briefly in the offer is the financing contingency. In the financing contingency of the offer, you'll put a deadline by which you have an opportunity to terminate if you are denied financing. And that deadline is so super important, because once that contingency passes, once that deadline is gone, you do not have the right to terminate for denial of financing. And your deposit of 5% becomes at risk unless you have the ability to buy the home in some other means. So if your mortgage contingency date is, say, for example, April 1st, and on April 2nd, you get denied your loan and we did not extend your mortgage contingency date, then your 5% deposit is at risk. And so how do we know if you've been approved for financing? Lenders will issue something called a loan commitment. In Massachusetts, that's what we have. Sometimes when you deal with a lender in another state, they don't know what those are. So another reason why it's important to use a lender who's local and seasoned and understands all of that. The loan commitment letters have in there what terms, it's a letter saying what terms under which the lender will give you the money. So the lender might say, okay, we'll give you $200,000, going back to that example, provided the following conditions are met. Again, Harvard does a great job in making sure those commitment letters don't have many conditions or ones that are fairly minor that can be met before the closing. Some lenders have commitment letters that have 30 conditions, and that's not a commitment letter because the bank has said, okay, we agree to give you this money provided these 30 conditions are met. If you were to show me a commitment letter like that with 30 conditions outstanding, I would not allow you to waive your finance contingency unless you had some strong means to close. In other words, a family member who could loan you the money or something along those lines, because you have put your 5% at risk for any one of those 30 items that the bank deems insufficient. And I've had it happen over the years where clients have decided to go forward without it, and the bank has deemed whatever the client was providing insufficient. They had a means to close, luckily, but that's a very risky thing to do. Next slide. So once the purchase and sale is signed, you want to work with the lender regarding that financing contingency. It's really important that you get the lender everything you need, everything they need, as soon as you can. In Massachusetts, unlike other states, we have a clause, it's usually in paragraph 8, called it's a time is of the essence clause. And it basically means that you must work diligently in getting everything that's required under the contingency of the mortgage that you've put into your purchase and sale agreement. And if you don't, and you get denied a mortgage, the first thing the seller is going to look for is to see, when did you apply? And did you work diligently in getting everything the lender needs? If you didn't, then even though you've been validly denied a mortgage, your 5% deposit is at risk. So, I say this and trying to urge people, make sure you send the lender everything that they need as soon as you can. Now, if you're dealing with a lawyer who is seasoned and who does transactional real estate, they're going to help you track your mortgage commitment date. And I tell clients you have to put it on your calendar, but we'll help as well. If you find an attorney says, I don't track mortgage commitment dates, I'd ask you to think again, because it's probably the single most important date after the purchase and sale is signed. They can help you review the commitment letter, as I mentioned, and to see if there's any conditions on there. If you have a commitment letter with 30 conditions, you shouldn't accept it or allow your contingency to pass until those conditions are down to just a few and ones you definitively know you can meet. So having someone with knowledge is super important in that regard. Attorney can help ask questions and help resolve problems during the course of the transaction. And so, I can't stress it enough. Putting people on your team that are seasoned and that do this all the time, while you're a first-time buyer who's never done this before, is incredibly important. Next slide. Okay, so now you've signed your offer, you've signed your purchase and sale agreement. Congratulations, your mortgage was approved, a commitment letter, a very clean commitment letter was issued. Now what happens? Well, the next thing you do is you go to the closing. And I hear this question all the time. What's a closing? I hate to ask, everyone keeps mentioning it. So a closing is one of the last steps in you purchasing a home. And so you'll meet at your attorney's office, or usually the bank attorney's office, on the day of the closing. And there you'll sign the closing documents. But before you do that, there's one last step. You want to schedule what's called a final walkthrough. And so you would go with your with your real estate broker to the home to do a walkthrough and determine if the condition of the property is the same as at the time of your inspection or at the time of the offer if you've waived your inspection. A good broker will help you looking through closets to see if there's any leak on a ceiling, looking up at all the ceilings, checking windows to make sure no condition has changed, running all of the appliances to make sure the appliances are still working. Because once you leave that final walkthrough and you close and that deed gets recorded, you have no more recourse against the seller, except in a couple of very specific situations when you're dealing with developers. But for the majority of transactions, once you close, you cannot go back to the seller on any issues you find. So that's why that final walkthrough is so important, to make sure the condition is the same. Did the movers gouge a hole in the wall in the move out? Did they scratch the floor? Was there a flood and water came in? People say to me, oh no, it's raining the day of my walkthrough, it's terrible. Oh, there's a hurricane the day of my walkthrough, it's terrible. I think that's one of the greatest things, because that's your last chance to test, is that home waterproof? Is there any issue? And if that home survives rain, thunderstorms, or whatever our New England weather throws at you, that's a great last check on the condition of the property. So you do your final walkthrough, and then, as I said, you go to the closing attorney's office, who's usually the bank attorney. And there you'll sign a very, very large stack of documents. These days, for the most part, I'd say 95% of the time, you'll get the documents in advance, the night before. And so you'll have a chance to kind of flip through and make sure everything is correct. You will not have the ability to negotiate these documents on the residential transactions. Commercial transactions are slightly different, but you won't have the ability to negotiate them. So as banks are sending you forms, as the credit union sends everything to you, make sure the information is correct. Make sure there's no typos on the documents. That way they use those forms to create the closing documents, and we'll have all the information on there. So the closing is essentially the formalization of everything in the purchase and sale agreement. All of the terms in there come to fruition. And so you'll wire the remaining funds that you need to send to the closing attorney, and those funds will sit in their account until the closing has completed. You can use a check for purchase and sale deposit, but you cannot for a closing. It should be wired, or in some cases will take certified funds. So make sure you have the ability to wire with wherever you keep your funds, whatever banking institution you use. So now you've signed the slew of documents that are sitting on the closing table, and then you look at me and say, now I own it, and I say, no, you don't. Because in Massachusetts, we have one last step in order to change ownership of a property, and that is to record the documents at the registry of deeds. So your deed, mortgage, and a homestead, which we can talk about another time if you decide to proceed, all get recorded, and those are all public records. So any friend, neighbor, etc. can see the deed, what you paid, and what your mortgage is. There are a few ways to make that private. We represent some public people who have done, we've talked to about putting into trusts and all of that, but that becomes a little more complicated and a little more expensive. But it's something that you can consider if it's super important to you to keep your home private from who owns it. So last thing I want to point out, we have a lot of clients who say, oh, I asked my broker and they said, that's fine. Oh, I asked the lender about this legal issue and they said, that's fine. Oh, I asked my friend about this legal issue and they said, that's fine. Only a lawyer and not a lender, title company, real estate broker can give you legal advice. So you want to make sure that you have a lawyer that you trust, who you can turn to for any legal questions you have along the way. Again, I can't stress the importance of having people who you can really trust on your team. Next slide. So some final advice: purchasing a home can be incredibly stressful. We talked about that at the beginning. It is a large financial purchase. It's probably one of the biggest purchases you'll ever make in your lifetime. So it's important to have people that you can really trust. And I keep repeating this, but I can't say it enough. I've worked with Harvard Credit Union for a long time. I know how great all of their team members are. I know how diligent they are. I mean, they really care and really try to give you a transaction that's smooth and try to make sure that they can work through the deal for you. Not all lenders are like that. And so you want to definitely consider all of that when factoring in who you want to go to for a mortgage. Sure, there are lenders that might offer you some crazy rate on the internet that you see, or some attorney who might offer to waive all their fees, but really consider if they're doing that, are they really giving you good service? And I know that Harvard does give you good service, and our office is around all the time. We answer emails, nights, weekends. We know when I see a panicked email from a client, whether it's a weekend or if I happen to be away on vacation, it takes 2 minutes to answer and make the client feel better than letting you stress through the weekend, through the evening, and maybe lose some sleep. So it is a wonderful, as much as I've made this sound stressful, it is a wonderful process. It's great, and I've done this for 25 years because I love the end when the clients are so excited to be in their new home, and I hear from them updating me on how the home's going and see them again. I just had a client today who was here for his 4th time. He has a growing family and he's changed, and I've known him since before he was married. So I feel like I've known him a large majority of his adult life. Next slide. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is my information if you need it. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, I think this is a great forum. If you're watching this online, it's nice to be able to stop and go back, or any of you are watching it now can certainly do that online. I think there's a lot of really good information here, and I think it's nice to have handy. Just want to thank everyone for letting me be here today. And again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We're going to save questions for the end, and now we're going to hear from Ken Ray of Kensa Inspections.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and giving us your time and attention. And thanks, of course, to HU-ECU for inviting me and facilitating this. My name is Ken Ray. I'm the owner of Kensa Inspections. Very quickly about me. So the first thing to tell you is the name of my company has nothing at all to do with my first name. It's entirely a coincidence. You can go to kensainspections.com to find out what that's all about. But there's meaning behind everything I do, including the name. As Jen mentioned, I've been doing inspections for a while. I've approaching 1,400 somewhere in there, lifetime inspections. And I've had my company in my third year now. My background is in IT, and I made a transition to doing this starting about 6 years ago. So it's been a road to get here, and I'm happy to be here to tell you what I know about home inspections. Next slide, please. So Sarah talked about the offer to purchase and the purchase and sale and the contingency periods, and that's where I come in. Somewhere along the way, you found an agent that you like who's showing you properties. You signed up with ECU to get a pre-approval letter. You found a place you want to buy. You made an offer. The offer was accepted. When you get to that point, you want to understand what is the purpose of getting a home inspection. And the primary reason is to understand the condition of what you're about to buy. As everyone has said, and we all know, it's your largest investment typically in your life. And wouldn't it be good to just know the status of that before you get into it? You can get a lot of information from your inspector about things that might need to be repaired, things that are routine maintenance items. And as an inspector, I always like to also emphasize the things that are good, not just things that need correction. So I try to take a holistic approach and make sure you understand things that are in good shape as well as things that need to be addressed. And so sometimes, depending on your deal and depending on the market, you may be able to work out negotiations with the seller. I had a client last week who got $2,500 off of their offer based on the inspection findings. So it's all different. Each time, each situation is unique, and you want to talk to your agent about what that looks like for you. But the important thing, as Sarah mentioned, is to get that inspection contingency into the offer. Sometimes you go forward without an inspection contingency, but you can still work with the seller or the seller's agent through your agent to still do an inspection, but without any contingencies attached to it. So for informational purposes. And the whole idea is to avoid surprises after you close. There have been a lot of cases where folks have waived the inspection, which no one will advise you to do, but people feel pressured to, and for whatever reason, they go forward without one. They move in after closing day, and the next day they find out some big surprises that they didn't know about. Because when you're there looking at the home, you obviously have very different eyes than a home inspector. And you're looking to see what's the layout of the house, how many bedrooms are there, is it a great neighborhood, all those kinds of things. You're not looking at the condition of the roof or how old the water heater is and things like that. Next slide, please. So why would you not? What happens if you don't get an inspection? I mean, it's basically just the opposite of what I just described. You don't know what you're buying. You don't know if there are any big ticket items that need to be addressed in the near future. You don't have any kind of information about what those costs might be. And you might find that you have some big surprises, and all of those are risks. And so it's a calculated risk. There's a service I offer. I call it post-closing consultation. What did I just buy service? And if I do 10 of those, 3 of them are unhappy because they took that risk and didn't know about a big ticket item, and they spent all their money on the down payment, and now they don't have finances left to deal with things. So knowledge is power. I don't have to tell folks who work at a university that, but you want to have all the knowledge possible. So whatever you can do to get that inspection contingency in there is to your benefit. Next, please. So what does inspection cost? Nearly every inspector I know bases the cost of the inspection on the size of the home. So whatever the square footage is. For the type of the property, that can vary as well. Think of a garden style condo, which is kind of like a 1 unit in a 10-unit building, apartment building gone condo type of thing, versus a large single family that might have a higher cost. There are options to the inspection, not just the inspection itself. And one of those, the 2 of those listed there, radon and termites, are some of the contingencies that can go into your offer to purchase. There's usually 4, I think, contingencies in a typical offer to purchase. And so radon could be one of them. Termites can be one. When you're looking for inspectors, if you're getting a price, them ask, do they have surcharges for different things? Some inspectors will charge more if it's far away, or if it has a crawl space, or if it's super old, things like that. For me, I just give you one price. It's based on the size of the home and whatever options you decide to add. Yeah. So the last point about the cost is, given the scale of what you're about to commit to and the time frame, and hundreds of thousands of dollars over decades, it's not the right time to shop around and get the cheapest inspection you can possibly find. You don't want to shortchange yourself on something so important. So the priority I would recommend for choosing an inspector would be the quality of the inspection and the quality of the inspection report, which is the deliverable that you get after the fact. And a good inspector will have some sample reports on their website. So as you're shopping around, I would look at price last, or even not at all, because they're not going to be hugely different. And in the grand scheme of things, it's going to be a small fraction of a small percent of your total investment. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, one more thing about options. So watch out for what is most people call a walk and talk or a walkthrough. Some agents call it a pre-inspection. A couple of times we mentioned this notion of waiving inspections. And so one thing that inspectors have been doing in the last couple of years is a partial verbal only service with no report. Be very careful of those, because first of all, it's not conforming to the license requirements that we inspectors are required to uphold, which says there's a list of things we're required to look at, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we're required to have a contract with you, and we're required to issue a report. So these sort of half-hour walk through and just look at the main big ticket things and just say what they think kind of deal might feel like it gives you some peace of mind. But first of all, it's the inspectors violating their license. And secondly, you're not getting a complete picture. So just be wary of that. It can be tempting to do that because the seller says, no, I'm not accepting your offer because you want an inspection. But talk to your agent about it and make sure you have clarity about what that really is, and try to avoid that process. Next, please. So speaking of process, as Sarah mentioned, you have that offer to purchase with a contingency period of usually 7 to 10 days, and it's during that time frame that you would have the inspection. So with Kensa, you can book me online. I have a form on my website. Some inspectors do, some don't. They call you. You have to play phone tag, that kind of thing. You schedule the inspection. It gets confirmed. We show up. We do the inspection, and with Kensa, we try to have a good time with it because it's we're trying to reduce stress, not add to it. So you'll learn the things you need to know about your report. After the inspection is over, I take the information back to finish up your report. I deliver it to you online. It's digital. It's not a PDF attached to an email. It's all in a browser. That's your deliverable that I was mentioning a minute ago. That lives on, and that's the document that memorializes the condition of the property at the time of the inspection. And then, just as importantly, I think, is if you have questions afterwards. Sometimes you're trying to figure out, what does this really mean? Get more clarity of information. When you're there during the inspection, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. There's just a ton of information to absorb. Not unlike these webinars, there's just lots coming at you all at once. And so being able to ask questions that you think of later, I think is important. So think of the spectrum of the process. It's not just a one and done type thing, depending on the inspector you choose. Next, please. So what is an inspection? What is included in a home inspection? As I said, there's standards of practice. We all have a license to uphold, just like all the other folks who provide services, lawyers, lenders, insurance brokers and such, real estate agents. So there's a list of things that we're required to look at. So the way I approach it is an outside in and then a top to bottom approach. And so there are things that are not the house that would go in the grounds section of the report. So things like retaining walls, decks, walkways, driveways, anything that's not the actual home itself would go in the grounds section. And then starting from the top, working our way down, the roof, each major part of the home for my report has a clickable entry in the table of contents that takes you straight to that section to look at all the items that are included in that part of the inspection. So for the roof, most people think of the shingles, and there's that for sure, but then there's also the chimneys, gutters, flashing, skylights, vents, all different kinds of things going on with the roof. And then the exterior of the home, that's where I talk about the siding, the windows, the doors, anything attached to the home, all goes in the exterior part of the report. Next, please. And then inside, this is where you as the buyer will probably spend the most time. You're looking at the interior of the space. What is, like I said before, what's the layout? How many bedrooms are there? But as an inspector, I'm looking at each part of the interior in a discrete way as well. So there's a section in my report just for the laundry, another one for the garage, if there is one attached. The bathroom gets its own section in the report, the kitchen. And each one of these, any one of these sections in the process can have anywhere from 6 to 8 or 10 or more discrete items to report on. So in the bathrooms, it's, the sinks, toilets, tubs, showers, the vents, the plumbing below the sink, all of those things would be addressed in the bathroom section. Each one of them has lots of things. And so one thing to keep in mind when you're asking around, talking to inspectors, trying to pick who to hire, ask them, do they include extra things? As I mentioned, there's a standards of practice that we're required. There's a list of things we're required to look at. Some inspectors use that as their maximum. They won't go beyond those standards. And some inspectors, very few, use that as the baseline and then add things on top of that. For example, refrigerators that are not built in, microwaves, things that are beyond the standards might get included if you have an inspector who does extra things. So all of these things that you probably are looking at when you're viewing the house, deciding you do want to make an offer, this is where you would spend time. For the inspector, it's just one of many. Next slide, please. For me, in terms of my process, where I usually spend the most time in the basement, but we've done all that interior stuff. We've done the outside stuff. We've done the decks, and now we're doing inside and again, I do a top to bottom. So I go straight to the attic, looking at all different kinds of things going on there with insulation, ventilation, the framing. Is there any signs of water? And in the basement, it's that's the main section of the home where I usually spend the most time because there's the most variety of things. Typically, in your average single family, you've got the plumbing, the water heater, the water supplies, the drains, the electrical panel, all the wiring, the heating system, the associated ductwork, then the structure itself, the foundation, floor or slab, the walls, the beams, the columns, the insulation, the ventilation. There's just a really long list of things that you as a typical buyer would not think of when you have no reason to. And a lot of times you won't even go into the attic. You'd have no reason to. And sometimes the seller wouldn't really have that as part of the showing. So there's lots to see beyond just the layout and that sort of thing. And all told, between the outside and inside and each major part of the home, there are literally hundreds of things to look at and report on. So there's a lot to absorb. And that's why I said it's important that you have time to think about it, read your report, and ask questions later. So you have that offer accepted, you have the contingency period, you book the inspection, you show up, but we do the inspection, you get the report later, and it goes through all of these things in great detail. So that's kind of a Reader's Digest version of the inspection itself. Next, please. Keep going. So one more thing to keep in mind is different types of properties. So there's a classic single family detached structure. You have a little bit of land usually with the property, but then there are condos and multi-units. So think of a triple decker, older apartment building gone condo. Or like I said earlier, a garden style, meaning a small unit in a larger apartment building. Those have a little bit different process. They're fundamentally the same, but if you're buying a condo or a townhouse, ask your inspector or your prospective inspector, do you do anything beyond the unit itself? Some inspectors will say, I'm only looking at the unit you're buying and nothing else beyond that. And they're technically correct in doing so. But for me, I'm kind of nosy. I want to see all the things. And so here's a picture of a typical 3-family. So let's say you were buying unit 2, the one in the middle there. So the unit above would care more about the roof than you would, and the unit below would care more about the foundation than you would. But I would still want to get to that roof if there's access to it. I would still spend time in the basement if there's access. Sometimes you have assigned storage in there, and inspector will limit just their effort just to that inside storage space. But to me, it's not your basement, but it is, and it's not your roof, but it is. As Sarah mentioned, there are condo documents usually a homeowners association, and they would have information in there about the reserves, the funding that they collect from you on a monthly basis to deal with repairs or maintenance. So that's the reason I look at things that are not necessarily your home, like the roof in a 3-family. Even though you're just buying one unit, I still want to inspect the roof, because there might not be a functional impact to you, but there could be a financial impact. So if there was a problem with the roof and I reported on it, then you would have that information, and you could compare that to what does the HOA, what does the condo agreement say about the health of the reserves? Is there a plan to do a repair? And that all gives you a more holistic view of the process and what you're getting into in a shared building environment. So at some point along the way, I have to stop. I can't like inspect the interior of unit 3 if you're buying unit 2, and I'm not allowed to, nor would I. But in terms of the exterior and the roof and the basement, those are important things to consider when you're looking at buying in a multi-unit building. Next, please. Yeah, there we go. That's it. So there's where you can find me online. And as others have said, you can ask questions anytime, reach out anytime you want. But in terms of the process for today, we'll wait to the end if you have any questions. I'm happy to do that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Ken. We appreciate your deep dive into this. So now I'm actually going to invite all of our panelists to come back on screen, and we'll go ahead and take questions, both questions that people asked in advance and questions that you've been putting in live during this webinar. If you didn't get a chance to and you have a question, it's the Q&A feature. Typically it's on the same bar with your mute button and those kind of things. So go into the Q&A, you can leave a question there, and we'll go ahead and ask the experts. So the first question is actually for Ryan. We had a person on, Ryan, from Connecticut, wondering if HUECU issues loans there. And I wonder if you could just say generally where we're able to do mortgage lending.
Yeah, sure thing. Welcome, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us. So we do lend in all 6 New England states and Florida at the moment. So Connecticut is totally covered. Give us a call. Happy to assist.
Great. Let's see. And oh, we had a question about where you'll be able to get to the recording. So our handle on YouTube is myhuecu on all the socials, including YouTube. If everyone who's on here is going to get that in an email, so you'll be able to see our YouTube there. So we will be sending that to you. Then we have a question, where's the best place to save money for a down payment to buy a home? And actually, I might ask Ryan that as well.
Yeah, I'll take that one. At the credit union, of course. No, but really, there's plenty of financial resources out there. A good kind of tip and trick is I like to advise people, if you do direct deposit, send it to a separate account. That way you're not touching it. You know what it's for. You can kind of watch it grow from there. But definitely schedule a time to talk with one of the loan officers at the credit union. We can kind of help you with a plan to get on track for savings.
And then in advance and during this webinar, we had just a number of questions that to some extent I feel like Ken has already answered, but we've had a lot of questions about, for instance, what is the recourse for things after a home has been bought, such as a basement wall collapse? Is a home inspection meaningful as after the home is bought, something was missed? Does the new owner just have to deal with it? And that could be either Ken or Sarah, I think, answering that.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So the inspection is a snapshot of a point in time, and it's the condition at the time of the inspection. Often an inspector will include, if there's something that needs to be addressed, who to talk to address it. And you'll get a sort of sense of there's a list of things that need to be addressed. But no one can predict the future. So there can be things that happen after the fact that can't be foreseen. And as Sarah was saying, once you close, you own the home and you're responsible. And once you've accepted, it's recorded in the public record and you have the keys and you're paying that mortgage, it's your home. There can be a good use of having an inspection after the fact too. Like I said, if you felt compelled to waive the inspection and you went through without that, it's not too late to get an inspection. That's that what did I just buy service that I mentioned. I offer a consultation that is just that verbal walk and talk thing. Once we're outside the transaction, then it's okay to do that. And so I've done that for buyers who waive the inspection, and then they at least have an understanding of the big ticket items and that kind of thing. But during the inspection, we'll typically find that, there's a issue with the basement and here's what you should do about it. But can you predict a failure in the future? No, that's usually, that's not included in the process. Any more so than if you were buying a car and you asked your mechanic to predict when would it break down on Tuesday or Wednesday. There's just no way to know that.
And Ken, we're going to keep you in the hot seat because we have
Yeah.
a number of questions for you. One, just basic one. Do you like to have the buyer with you during the inspection?
Yes, I do. That's a great one. I encourage client participation as much as possible. When you're there in the process, hearing what I have to say and seeing what I'm pointing out to you in real time, you tend to absorb a lot more of the information that way versus not being there and only seeing it on screen later. And I always talk about context. Things can look really bad on screen versus what they are in reality, and the words don't necessarily match the tone and intent of the issue. So, for example, I could say there's a safety problem with this dangling live electrical wire in the basement. And if you weren't there to see what I'm talking about, it's far out of reach and it's in the corner and it takes an electrician 5 minutes to fix it. The context is it sounds terrible, but it's easy to deal with. So I love it when clients are there participating, following along, asking questions. The most I had at any one inspection, my record is 14 people showed up. The brothers, the sisters, the cousins,
Wow.
the uncles, the mom and dads, the contractors. At some point it gets a little nutty, but and I focus on my client and just what they have to, their questions that they have. But participation highly encouraged. You'll get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, we see this too sometimes when people agree to a repair and then we get to the closing and we've described it the way that we were told to describe it. No one knows it's actually been done. They're like, well, I wasn't at the inspection, so I didn't know what the repair was. So it kind of defeats the purpose. If you're spending that money, you really should be there to see what Ken's showing you as far as what needs repaired. One other thing I wanted to mention is there's a new trend, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, where people do waive the inspection contingency, but then they add in language saying the inspection is for informational purposes only. And so if you can get that into your offer and do that before the purchase and sale is signed, your only risk, if you find some huge problems that Ken discovers, is the $1,000 for the deposit of the offer. And so that can sometimes help. Some sellers are getting smart to this because they realize the buyer is going to start renegotiating, but that's something that we've been seeing a little more of. It's not an actual contingency they put for informational purposes only, but it's certainly a means for the buyer to get out before they put that hefty 5% down.
That's a great tip, Sarah. Thank you. I know most of our questions seem to be for home inspector, but I know how important the legal side is. My house has an address that has a half in it, which sounds really cute, but over the years has caused me no end of difficulties with databases primarily. But in one case, all the mortgage documents were written up for the house next door because it's a half,
Oh.
but it's a single family. And I won't go into all the details about that, but suffice it to say, I was really glad for my lawyer's help and advice because, you know, what do you do in that situation? And you feel like you have to go forward, but this is not my property. It's written out for. This was not with the credit union. I'll just say, anyway, so Ken, we have a question. Do inspectors look at other structures such as a barn, detached garage, storage shed as part of the inspection?
Yes, we do. Those are optional. The standards of practice say anything attached to the house is included and is required to be inspected. If there's a detached garage or a barn, that's typically an upcharge for that. In extreme cases, I've done like large mansions with what they call a carriage house, which is a garage with finished space above, like a in-law or au pair type apartment above. And that's basically a whole second home because it has a foundation structure, roof, siding, plumbing, electrical, and all that. For storage sheds, typically what I'll do with that is if there's a storage shed, I won't charge someone to tell you what I see. I'll just say what the condition of it is and not write it up. If I'm putting it in a report and it's detached, it's an upcharge typically because it's a whole structure and there's the things that are required to report on and it's time and effort. But if it's a detached storage shed, like for the mower and that type of stuff, I typically won't charge for it. However, there's one exception to that where if you're doing a VA loan, the VA requires you to have a termite inspection. That's most people call it. It's more accurately called a wood destroying insects inspection. So if there's a detached structure, the VA requires that to be inspected for insects as well, not just the main home. And so what I do is I include the required, it's called the NPMA-33 form. For any VA buyer, VA client, I include that for free. I'm licensed or certified by the National Pest Management Association to do wood destroying insects inspections, and I can offer that report via license that I have on my software. So it's a smart question to ask your prospective inspector. Do you include that type of stuff? If there's just like a 1-car or 2-car unfinished detached garage, a lot of times I'll just do that the same as a storage shed. I won't charge the client to tell them what I think about it. It's often pretty clear, and it's often not worth charging someone to write up what's plainly visible because it's unfinished and pretty basic structure. So I try to be flexible on those.
Sarah, could you back up and just go over again what the home
Sure.
inspection contingency is? Because we have a question, well, why does the
Sure.
home inspection matter? There's no recourse for an issue in the home once I own it. So can you clarify?
Right. Sure. So in the offer phase, there's a page that'll say home inspection contingency. And as Ken mentioned, you can test for pests as well, like termites and all of that. So if during that phase you discover there's an issue at the home, then you absolutely can try to renegotiate the price, ask for a repair, ask for a credit, and all of that. And so that's your last chance to do so. If you didn't do it and you waive it, and then you close, and then you find the issue in a post-closing inspection or for whatever reason, then you can't go back to the seller. So it's important because it's your last opportunity to get a credit or a price reduction from the seller before the closing, because as you just correctly stated, there's no recourse except with developers in certain circumstances against the seller.
Thank you. And for attendees, if you haven't been into the chat yet, a lot of the links are in the chat for how to reach our panelists and for some of the things that they've mentioned. This is another question for Ken. For a home that has underground direct burial cables that feed electricity into the home, how does an inspection work given it is on the exterior of the home?
So that's a good question. And that brings up the point about what an inspection is. It's readily visible, readily accessible components. And the electrical service connection is one of the required items. A lot of times it'll come from a wire connected to a telephone pole coming to that house and attached to the outside of the house. In newer construction, it might be underground and only comes up in a conduit right below the meter on the outside of the house. And so the inspection is limited to what I can easily access. I'm super nosy. I'll try to see all the things. Like if there's tough access to an attic and I have to move stuff out of the way, I'll do that. But when it's electrical service underground, I'm not trying to dig up the ground or open up the utility company's meter box or things like that. But it is a line item to look at. But when something's buried underground, there's no way to look at it. One thing that's related to that would be your sewer connection from the house to the street. In older homes where it's cast iron, I always recommend to get a plumber to do a sewer scope, to put a camera in that pipe just to see what's the condition of that pipe underground between the inside of the house and the street. I look at all the stuff visible inside the house, but I can't see inside that sewer pipe. So there are a few things like that that you want to be aware of. And in the report that I offer, I will note that electrical service connection is underground and not visible and not inspected. And I will say there's cast iron pipe, you should get a sewer scope, those kinds of things, so that you have that information written down. I just wanted to add one thing about the contingency. It is pretty common to do an offer with an inspection contingency, but to say in that contingency, the cap that we're going to request for negotiation, if it's any one item is under $50,000, we're not going to ask for it. So some ridiculously high number, so that the seller knows basically the buyer's not going to try to negotiate price. It's very common to say inspection for informational purposes only, but that's still an inspection. It's still the full process. So depending on the agent you use or what part of the state you're in, there might be slightly different lingo related to that. But the offer either has an inspection contingency or it doesn't. And then it's the terms of that contingency that are important to you. Are you trying to negotiate? Are you trying to use it as a back out? Or are you saying no negotiation, we're just doing the inspection?
Thank you, Ken. Sarah, do sellers have a duty to disclose known issues, or is it up to the buyer to find issues on their own in the inspection?
So sellers don't really have a duty to disclose. There's these seller informational sheets that I've seen in certain parts, not in the greater Boston area, but maybe outside of the suburbs, that sellers will fill out or inspectors will ask for. Ken, I don't know if you do, but as part of the inspection process, they ask them to put out any sort of known defects, but they're not really required to. The broker, the listing agent, if they know of something, then they are technically required to. So it's a little bit different. The one exception to that for sellers, again, is if they're a developer, they're held to a higher standard, and so they may have to disclose. And like I said, the broker does, but a normal seller isn't required to. In other states, like California, they're required to disclose every single defect in the home. And so when I have clients from California, they're very surprised to hear that sellers don't have to do that here. But there isn't that obligation here, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've come across this question a lot. Sellers are required to say if there's lead paint. There's a lead paint disclosure thing.
That
But
part.
virtually every single time they say, I don't know, because as soon as they say there is lead paint, that information is attached to the house. And so that's the one, I think, legal point. But Sarah's right that if the realtor, the seller's agent, has information and they're a realtor, meaning a member of the National Association of Realtors, they have different standards of ethics. And one of their requirements is if they know about defects in the home, they're required to proactively disclose those. That's an agent disclosure, not a seller disclosure. So when I'm doing an inspection, a smart seller's agent won't follow me around. They don't want to hear what I'm saying, because anything that I say out loud, now they're obligated, in theory, to go update the listing in MLS to say there's a problem with the water heater, or there's a problem in the attic, or whatever it might be. But sellers, I personally do not want to know what the disclosures are, because I want to have an objective look at the house. I don't want to be influenced by what a seller says. Every once in a while, the seller will proactively say, we know there's a problem with water in the basement, or we know the boiler is old, or they might say they'll disclose the good stuff. We just replaced the roof a year ago. We just replaced the water heater 2 years ago. So they'll disclose things that try to, in an effort to make things look nice, but as Sarah said, they're not required to disclose anything. The only thing they have to disclose is lead paint. Septic, if it's private sewer, or what's called septic, they disclose that by way of the Title V inspection, which the seller is required to do. But they're not required to say, well, I have private septic. They're required to have a passing Title V cert, and that sort of becomes a disclosure.
Yeah. That'll be something in the purchase and sale as well.
Right.
Ken, we had a question. Will the home inspector be willing to interpret the implications of what they find for you? For example, will they say, based on the condition of the roof, I'd estimate it's good for 5 to 10 more years? Or do they just stop at describing the condition of the roof?
That's a great question. That kind of gets into a slippery slope of predicting the future. I always put the estimated age of the roof, and I explain the type of material used for the roof and what a normal expectation of the lifespan for that item is. When I do an inspection, I have 3 buckets of concern: safety, water, and big ticket items. So for big ticket items, I try to tell you how old things are, that where I can determine the age or estimate the age, so that you understand where it is in the life cycle. So for a roof, for example, if it's a 30-year shingle and it appears to me to be 10 to 12 years old, I give you that information. I don't tell you that your roof is definitely going to last another 20 years, because there's no way to predict that. But you get that sort of general understanding for the roof. For things in the basement, like the boiler, the water heater, furnace, air conditioning, almost always I can tell you the date of manufacturer, because I know the syntax of the serial number that includes the year it was made. And I tell you, so for example, a typical gas furnace should last 20 years. This one's only 3 years old. Check that box for a big ticket item. That's literally what I say in my process. So age of main parts in the basement, the gear in the basement and the roof are part of my process. But I don't
Yeah,
try to tell you it'll last 10 more years or anything like that.
and if you're trying to determine if something was replaced recently, if they have a bunch of list of improvements on the property, one thing you can do is go to town hall. It's a lot of it's online these days, and check for permits to see if there was a permit pulled for a renovation, permit pulled for a furnace or something that was added. We'll do that sometimes when clients say, I want to confirm all these permits are on the property. You can pull those online right now. So that's, even if you're putting in the offer, that's something you can look for very quickly without waiting until after the offer's been accepted.
Yeah, permit is a good source of knowing, like, when an addition was put on, when a deck
Right.
was built. Age of appliances in the basement, though, it's typically I'll get that from the manufacturer's data tag.
We have one question that is more an individual situation, a med student who has significant debt that may affect the ability to secure a loan. And I would ask, how do they prepare to finance and set up savings? So I'm going to ask Ryan to answer this, but also Shannon, my colleague who's on here, if you wouldn't mind putting into the chat the Green Path link. So through the credit union, you have access to free financial counseling, individualized counseling through our partner Green Path. And I would recommend in a more complicated situation like that, that you take advantage of that free counseling. But Ryan, you want to comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to say, reach out to GreenPath. They're obviously a wonderful resource that we partner with at the credit union, but we do offer physician loans specifically. We kind of have to take a look at your individualized situation to answer this. So again, reach out to us that way. There's really not a blanket statement to answer that, but if you reach out to us, we can kind of weigh your options and assist you further.
Okay, I think at this point, I want to just cover our last couple slides, and I would encourage folks to reach out to the experts who are on here for individualized questions, and to join us for the next couple days of the Home Buyer Forum, because we're going to cover financing, we're going to cover putting your team together, and affordable paths to homeownership. So just to let you know, the credit union has a number of mortgage loan officers, and we're here for you. If you want to go ahead and get that pre-qualification letter or get started on your process about financing, I encourage you to reach out. We do have also Daisy Familia, one of our loan officers, is fluent in Spanish. So if that's a concern for you, keep that in mind. And the best way to reach out to our mortgage loan office and to see current rates and everything that's going on right now is this link, which we're going to put into the chat, huecu.org/mortgages. So that's a great place to get started on your journey. We'd also love your feedback on how we did in this webinar. Please fill out the survey for us and give us your feedback, and we'd love to hear it so we can do better. And we really hope that we can see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to hear more from Ryan and Daisy about the home buying process. And you can sign up. The link is in the chat for future days of the home buying forum. And remember, Friday is affordable housing options. So we look forward to seeing you. And thank you so much to our panelists. You've been great and just really helped break down the ins and outs of what to expect. And I know I've bought and sold a few times now in my life, and there's always something new, and it's really good to have experts who know and do this day in and day out. So we appreciate you very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Jen.
Thank you. All right, everybody, have a good day.